Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring
This is
tithing and giving in Christianity.
okay, cool.
We've got some sources here that break down, like the biblical basis for both,
right.
how they're similar, how they're different, and even some modern day arguments for and against tithing.
Oh, interesting.
It's pretty complex, so we're here to try to help you sort through it all.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a fascinating topic, especially since it, deals with how our faith kind of intersects with our finances,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
And then it's something that's evolved over time. So understanding the historical context is key, I think.
For sure, for sure. So our sources start by defining these terms. And tithing is probably familiar to a lot of you listening.
Yeah.
That traditional idea of giving 10% of your income to God.
Right.
But what's interesting is how deeply rooted this concept is in the Old Testament.
It really is. Our source actually cites Malachi 3.6, where God's essentially telling the Israelites to test him, right?
Yep.
By bringing the whole tithe into the storehouse. And back then, this tithe was used to support the Levites, who were the priestly tribe, responsible for temple services, as well as the poor and the upkeep of the temple itself.
Right.
It's almost like an ancient system of taxation, but with a spiritual purpose. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, like a built-in system of social support
Exactly.
woven right into their faith.
Yeah, and that's actually a key difference from giving,
Okay.
which seems to be much broader in scope and intention. We're not just talking about money here.
Right.
Our source highlights how giving can also encompass time, resources, even simple acts of kindness.
So it's more about generosity that just flows from the heart.
Yeah.
Our source specifically points to 2 Corinthians 9.7. It says that God loves a cheerful giver. What does that mean to you? A cheerful giver?
It's a good question. Does it mean giving without any expectation of something in return?
Hmm.
Or does it mean being mindful of where our donations are going?
Right.
And ensuring they're being used effectively? It adds another dimension to the idea of giving, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. So we've got these two concepts then, tithing and giving, and they've got these potentially different origins, different motivations.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the Bible for a minute and look at the foundation for both of these ideas.
Okay.
What do we have?
The source highlights a couple of key verses when it comes to tithing. One that really stood out to me was Genesis 28.22, where Jacob makes a vow to God,
Okay.
promising to give him a tenth of everything he receives.
So that really sets the stage for tithing, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And then we jump ahead to Leviticus 27.30, which lays out the principle that everything from the land ultimately belongs to God,
Okay.
making the tithe a holy portion set aside for him.
I see. What's fascinating about those verses?
What I find fascinating is the connection they draw between tithing and God's provision. There's this sense that by acknowledging God's ownership through the tithe, you're recognizing his role in your blessings. So it goes beyond just giving money. It's about recognizing a deeper principle.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But then we move into the New Testament, and the source brings up verses like Luke 6.38, where Jesus talks about those who give generously receiving blessings in abundance.
Right.
It's almost like this beautiful image of overflow. He says, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over.
Wow. That imagery is so powerful.
I know, right? And then there's Acts 20.35. This one states very simply, it is more blessed to give than to receive.
Yeah, a classic.
Would you say there's a shift happening here as we move from the Old Testament emphasis on tithing to these New Testament teachings on giving?
I think that's a really perceptive observation. There's definitely a shift in emphasis.
Okay.
Moving away from a legalistic requirement and towards a more heartfelt expression of faith and love.
I see.
It becomes less about hitting a specific percentage
Right.
and more about the intention and the heart behind the giving.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. But even with those differences, our source points out that both tithing and giving ultimately serve as acts of worship.
Absolutely. They both acknowledge God as the source of our blessings, right?
Yeah.
And they both contribute to supporting God's work in the world, whether that's through the church or by helping those in need.
Yeah, and to your point earlier, the source reminds us that this goes beyond just financial giving, right?
Yeah.
We can give our time, our talents, even our attention and compassion to those around us.
Yeah, it's about reflecting that love and abundance that God has poured into our lives, right?
I like that.
Our source actually connects these practices back to Proverbs 3.9, which says to honor the Lord with your wealth and the first fruits of all your crops. So it really ties those ideas of tithing and giving together.
Oh, I see. But things get really interesting when our source dives into the modern-day debate surrounding tithing. Is it still relevant or not?
Yeah, that's a question that many Christians grapple with today.
Yeah.
And there are some compelling arguments on both sides,
For sure.
So one of the arguments against tithing that our source highlights, it centers around 2 Corinthians 9.7,
Okay.
emphasizing that giving should come from the heart, not out of compulsion.
It's that cheerful giver idea again.
Exactly. This viewpoint emphasizes that in the New Testament, grace kind of replaces the Old Testament law.
Right.
So giving becomes less about fulfilling a legal obligation and more about making a personal choice, right?
Okay.
Motivated by gratitude and love for God.
So that probably resonates with people who think that strict 10% rule feels a bit rigid or out of step with the message of grace.
Yeah, for sure.
But what about the arguments for keeping the practice of tithing?
Yeah, so the source dives into that side of the debate as well, bringing up a really interesting passage, Matthew 23.23.
Okay.
Here, Jesus criticizes the Pharisees, for meticulously tithing even the smallest of herbs.
Right.
While neglecting these weightier matters of the law, things like justice, mercy, and faithfulness.
That's a powerful image. Makes you wonder if simply giving 10% is enough.
Yeah.
Or if true faithfulness requires something more, right?
Absolutely. It challenges us to look beyond just the numbers,
Yeah.
and consider what it really means to live out our faith in a holistic way.
So it's not just about the amount we give, but also the motivation behind it. It seems like both sides of the debate have something valuable to offer.
They really do. The argument against tithing, it reminds us to check our hearts.
Okay.
And ensure our giving is genuinely motivated by love, right?
Yeah.
And not just a sense of duty. But then the argument for tithing challenges us to consider whether we're truly prioritizing God's work,
Okay.
even in our finances, right?
So it's like finding that balance between discipline and heartfelt generosity.
That's it.
So with all these different viewpoints, can we actually have both tithing and giving coexisting in our lives? Our source seems to think so.
Yeah.
They point to 2 Corinthians 9.11.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. That verse is so encouraging. It talks about being enriched in every way.
Right.
So that we can be generous on every occasion. And then it connects our generosity to thanksgiving to God.
Right.
So it's like this beautiful cycle. God blesses us. We respond with generosity, and that generosity leads to even more thanksgiving.
That's beautiful. And our source suggests that maybe tithing can be that foundational discipline, that commitment to honoring God.
Right.
And then giving becomes that overflow, those spontaneous expressions of generosity. So it's not an either-or situation.
Exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not about choosing one over the other.
Right.
It's about understanding the principles behind both.
Okay.
And then discerning how they resonate with your own beliefs and convictions. What feels most authentic to you on your faith journey?
Yeah, and that might look different for each person listening.
Right.
Some might feel drawn to that structured approach,
Yeah.
while others might resonate more with those free-flowing acts. The key takeaway is that there's no judgment.
Absolutely not. It's about finding that path that leads you closer to God
Okay.
and allows you to express your gratitude in a meaningful way.
So after diving into all these different perspectives, this debate isn't really about finding a right or wrong answer.
Yeah, I agree. It's more about understanding the heart behind each practice.
Right.
And then reflecting on how those principles resonate with your own personal relationship with God.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about that personal journey of figuring out how generosity can best be expressed in your own life, right?
Exactly. And maybe for some of you listening, this has sparked some new questions or insights about your own approach to this.
Yeah, like maybe you're rethinking that 10% rule.
Right.
Or you're feeling inspired to find new ways to express generosity beyond just finances.
Right. Whatever it is, we encourage you to lean into those questions and see where they lead.
Yeah, because ultimately this isn't just about money.
Right.
It's about a deeper transformation that happens when we embrace generosity as a way of life.
Yeah, it's about recognizing God's abundance in our lives and responding with open hands and grateful hearts.
It really is. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
What resonated with you today?
Do you see tithing as a starting point? Or does giving from the heart feel more authentic to your faith journey?
Maybe you're even exploring both.
Right.
Share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, let us know.
We'd love to continue this conversation.
And in the meantime, remember that there's no right or wrong answer here.
Yeah.
It's about finding that personal connection with the principle of generosity and allowing it to shape your life
Exactly.
in meaningful ways.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, Thanks for listening, everyone.
Until next time.